Recently, I tried to learn OpenGL in 1 month, and this is what I ended up with. Hey guys, DevHedron here, and what you see on screen right now is a batch renderer written in C++ and OpenGL over the period of about 1 month. The first 2 weeks were spent learning the basics of OpenGL, and then the last 2 weeks I started writing and working on the batch renderer. The very first thing I did was find the Cherno's OpenGL series, which I think is very good but a little outdated now. So that is the playlist I followed first. While following the Cherno's OpenGL series, I stumbled upon a website called docs.gl which contained documentation on OpenGL functions, and this was very useful later on. And then I just jumped in and started coding. One note, everything I mention in the video will be in the description, such as the resources, tutorials and all that stuff, except for the batch renderer because it's not really in a state to be on GitHub yet, so yeah, I think you'll have to wait. While I was following the Cherno's OpenGL tutorials, I learned a lot, and I'll explain some of the fundamentals of OpenGL which may help you if you want to program in OpenGL as well. Now let's say you want to draw a triangle onto your screen. Now the first thing you will need is vertices. Now those vertices will be in NDC, which are normalized device coordinates, and those coordinates are between -1 and 1. Once you have your vertices, you're gonna have to send them into the VBO, which is the vertex buffer object. Now that vertex buffer is going to be storing the vertices, obviously, and then there will also be something called the vertex array object. Now that will store the vertex attributes, so like how each vertex is designed or put into the vertex buffer. Now you could have like the vertex positions, so in the normalized device coordinates, and you could also have the color of that vertex. So that's where the VAOs come in, and you're gonna have to use them to specify the vertex attributes. There's also something called an IBO or an index buffer object, which just allows you to reuse vertices. Now after we have done all of this, this is where the shaders come in. Now these things take in the vertices, and then the shaders or the shader is ran on the GPU, and then you see the output. Now that is obviously a very oversimplified explanation of things, but I hope you guys understood what those things are, and like that basically explains what and how your GPU works and how things are rendered onto your screen. There are also some things called textures which can get very complicated for beginners, and they're quite involved when you're trying to draw them in OpenGL. So first you have to have the texture coordinate in the vertex buffer object, which basically means you have to define which vertex is what texture coordinate, so what coordinate is in the texture, and then you have to assign that texture to a texture slot out of like I think 32. It depends on what your device is, and then you pass the texture into the shader, and then the shader does the rest of the work. Now this is where a few problems come in with our framework that we've written following the Cherno's OpenGL tutorial series. If we wanted to render two triangles or two squares, we'd have to have two draw calls. Now that's not a lot, but like, what if we wanted to draw 1,000 squares or even more? That's where batch rendering comes in. Essentially, you just have one VBO, one VAO, and then one IBO, and then you have one draw call. So this allows you to draw way more squares than you could imagine in one draw call, which is pretty good and fast. After I completed the Cherno's OpenGL tutorials, I tried following his batch rendering tutorials, but one of the main things that held me back was that I wasn't really that experienced with the framework, and it was just me following and writing exactly what he had wrote, so I didn't really understand it that much. And the batch renderer also used a version of OpenGL that my device didn't support, so that was one thing that held me back, and I didn't write the batch renderer until I stumbled upon another OpenGL tutorials playlist, and this had exactly what I needed, and I ended up following it until part 12 of the series. Now I'd like to shout out Redeye 6699 and Dandy McGee or Dandy McG from Harold Serrano's server for helping me optimize the batch renderer after I followed the Cherno's batch rendering tutorials again. But this time, this is where docs.gl came handy, and I used it to find what functions were being used, what OpenGL 4.6 functions were being used, and then I looked for the OpenGL 4.1 or modern OpenGL alternatives. The batch renderer is written in OpenGL 4.1, and there are special files or header files for VAOs, IBOs, VBOs, and there's going to be a batch renderer class soon as well. It allows for shader functions, multiple input like controller input and more stuff like that, textures, and there's little abstraction, so it's not that restricted. And yes, it uses Python to compile the C++ code. In the coming weeks, I would like to add a test class which basically has a constructor initialization. It can handle specific events which I need, and then update, and then render, and then clean up when I finish doing the test. More tests, because right now it's just like batch rendering and some textures. A test menu is going to be essential for that as well. I'm GUI support, which I would probably use for the test menu, and I'm GUI is just a graphical user interface library. I will probably make it a framework rather than an engine, and add 3D to it as well. I could organize it and abstract it even further, like abstract the batch renderer, because that can definitely be abstracted. Port it to C, that's something I would like to try out. I'm not 100% sure, but I'd like to try it out. I would also like to add removing and adding to the batch, so removing certain elements when I want to, and comments, so commenting some things and explaining what they are in the code, and then some GitHub debugging, so I could also add logging into the framework using SPD log or speed log, and then a proper camera, because right now I'm just using a library called GLM, and I'm using a function which just scales up the textures and scales them down whenever I press certain keys. And I would like to experiment with some like writing my own OpenGL function wrapper. I probably won't do that, but like it doesn't hurt to try it out. And I'd definitely be adding CMake support, or just a CMake file for compiling, since I told some people who are experienced with C++ and they didn't really like me using Python for compiling. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time. I know I was very late with this video, and the thing is I've been working on it for a long time, and the past month I was working on learning OpenGL, so that's why I didn't really upload a video. So I think there would also be an upload schedule change to one video per month, and yeah, thank you for watching.